Okay, I think we are streaming live. I will begin. Thank you everyone for joining us today in the first lecture of Department of Linguistics Centennial Year Lecture Series, New Horizons in Linguistics. We are joined here today by Professor Sri Kumar, former head of the Department of Linguistics. I will begin. One second. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Okay. I'm sorry, we are very new to this. We are joined here today by Professor Sri Kumar sir, former head of the Department of Linguistics, Professor Kavita Rastogi, current head of the department, Dr. Vishnu Singh, General Secretary for the Society for Endangered and Lesser Known Languages, the NGO that is supporting us today, our beloved students and several alumni. We welcome you all to this evening of linguistic knowledge exchange. First, I would like to request Professor Kavita Rastogi to kindly welcome Imtiaz sir in a few words, and then we can move on to Sri Kumar sir. Ma'am, you're mute.
Yeah, thank you for letting me know, Madhuri, and thank you very much. I'm so proud to, because we have been planning for this event, and now this event, we are inaugurating this lecture. A very warm welcome to Professor Imtiaz Hasnain. Imtiaz ji, as I fondly call him, is a very friendly, my colleague, old colleague, and he has been visiting our department on several occasions. And I'm happy to share, when I mentioned him that I'm planning to do such series, he immediately gave his consent. So I'm thankful to that. Thank you very much, Imtiaz ji. And once again, I welcome you you are going to start this series. So, and your lecture, I think, will be highly informative, as I have heard you many times. And I would also like to welcome all the participants on behalf of Department of Linguistics. Madhuri, over to you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. Now I would like to request Professor Sri Kumar sir to kindly welcome sir as well and talk a little bit about the department and what the department has been doing in the past few years.
Good evening to everyone. Today, the Department of Linguistics at the University of Lucknow is proud to present before you this international series of web talks on linguistics. The Society of Endangered and Lesser Known Languages is also collaborating with us in this venture. We are currently in the midst of celebration times at the university because we are completing our 100 years this month. And this web talk series is dedicated to this centenary year celebration. The University of Lucknow has been leading the light of learning all through these glorious years and has been a major state university in Uttar Pradesh. And our Department of Linguistics at the University of Lucknow has been teaching linguistics as an independent department since 1972. And in 2 years' time, we will be approaching our 50th year. We are a small department comprising 3 of us, Professor Kavita Rastogi, Madhuri Kakoti, and myself. We also have some young scholars with us, Dr. Vishnu Kumar Singh, Dr. Sushma Goel, and Dr. Avinash Chand to join us whenever we are in need to shoulder the responsibilities in the department. Our department has played host to several national and international seminars and conferences over the past, such as the Linguistic Society of India's All India Conference of Linguists twice, and much recently, in 2018, the Himalayan Language Symposium was held, and also several others were held in between and afterwards. The national seminar on the endangered and lesser known languages, the ELKAL, which is now an annual event organized by the CEL, grew out of seminars launched in the department. The department has expertise in both formal and the applied aspects of language. The department has also been actively contributing in several spheres. We have, collaborated with the SPELL program of Central Institute of Indian Languages, Mysore, and have successfully documented two endangered languages in the state of Uttarakhand, that is Jad and Dharma, under the SPELL program. To begin the International Web Talk series, today we have with us Professor Imtiaz Hasnain, a leading social linguist, as the inaugural guest speaker. Uh, Professor Imtiaz Hasnain is quite well known, and he's a friend of ours. He has been coming to the department and helping us quite often. I'm happy to welcome him to this web talk series. So now it is over to Madhuri Kakuti. Yeah.
Thank you very much, sir. Before we move on to the lecture, we would like to thank the Society for Endangered and Lesser Known Languages for their support and collaboration. They have requested that we play a video in order to understand what the society does. So I would like to play the video right now. The volume might be a little low. I hope all of you will forgive us for that.
Today, languages across the world. Each language is a repository for the culture and worldview of its speakers. Its grammar and lexicon store shared experiences of past generations, and it is through this channel that the knowledge and beliefs of one generation are transmitted to the next. So imagine what happens when we lose a language. An entire worldview, an entire culture, details on how to become a member, please visit CEL's website www.celindia.org.
Thank you everyone for your patience. Now we'd like to move ahead with the main agenda of today's meeting, Professor Hasnain's lecture. Let me introduce you. He does not need any introduction, but I have some very personal connections with sir as well. He might not be aware. Sir is a senior. He was a senior at JNU. He passed out a long time before I was even a student. But we do have that thing in common. And also, when he was the editor of Indian Linguistics from volumes 73 to 75, he did publish my first ever peer-reviewed article in Indian Linguistics, volume number 74, for which I am extremely grateful to him. And obviously, there were a number of comments and a number of reviews that he had given on the article, which helped me become better as a linguist and as somebody who dabbles in the art of writing articles every now and then. So thank you very much, sir, and welcome to the New Horizons of Linguistics, the Department of Linguistics Initiative. Hasnain sir is a professor of social linguistics in the Department of Linguistics in the Aligarh Muslim University. He holds a PhD from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, and he has been a recipient of the President's Inspired Teachers for 2015 award, which is the highest civilian recognition for university-level teachers for the central universities in the Republic of India. He has served as the editor-in-chief of Indian Linguistics for the volume 73 to 75. He has also been a senior fellow of the Central Institute of Indian Languages in Mysore, a visiting professor at Center for Linguistics, JNU, visiting scholar at the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, Shimla, and senior visiting scholar at Örebro University of Sweden. His research interests include social linguistics, critical discourse studies, language planning, language endangerment, and minority language rights. He's currently working on a project titled The Linguistic Activation and Bidirectional Reading in Urdu, an eye tracker and electroencephalogram investigation funded by the Department of Science and Technology, Ministry of Science and Technology, and in the Government of India. Thank you very much, Imtiaz sir, for coming here. And I'm sure all of our students, all our teachers, and everyone will be absolutely, completely benefited by the lecture that you are going to give us today. Sir, over to you, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Madhuri. Thank you for taking back to that memory lane of being an editor-in-chief of Indian Linguistics. Perhaps you have given me too much of credit for your publication. Of course, it was the first publication of yours, but it appeared because of your academic strength. It was a good article, and as the tradition of the Indian Linguistics has been, that we give it for the review. The reviewers' comments were there.
Thank you,
responded to the comments, and there it was. So my only credit is that I was just a conduit between your publication and you. That's all. Thank you very much,
Thank
Madhu,
you, sir. Thank you, sir.
words. And of course, to my friends, both Kavita ji and Sri Kumar, both of them who have been, we have very closely been associated with both because of their warmth, their hospitality, and whenever I wanted their help, they came to us. And whenever they wanted me to be there, of course, I could not say no for those things. So with these words, I'm honored to be there as part of the first speaker for your endeavor, for your international web talk as part of the celebration of your anniversary. And thank you once again to you and to the organizers and even to your university for inviting me to give this talk. As I've just communicated, the talk is basically on style in social linguistics beyond Lebov. And in fact, the initial topic that I had suggested, I had put certain ellipses there in the title after beyond Lebov. But ellipses, they also do get confused, because one tends to gloss over them, saying that they are additional full stops added to the topics. But that was a very constructive, deliberate intervention of mine, simply because to tell you that when I was using the ellipses, for me, the ellipses merely conveyed that I'm what Beckett talked about some time back, that I never want to be part of any kind of a categorization, because this categorization makes you become a victim of positivism. And this is what has really inspired me to go beyond Lebov, because when I'm going to talk about Lebov, I know that there are certain certainties there. I know that there are certain aporias there. I know that there are certain blind spots there. And one cannot have with certitude that this is what it is. And that is the reason for me, the ellipses were very important. I just wanted to connect that my talk to the ellipses, because I'm going beyond Lebov. Not that Lebov is being undermined in the process, but Lebov is being taken further, because I'm sure you people know that Lebov is a person who has recently been awarded the most prestigious Stalker Parsons Prize. This is in March 2020 that he was given, and the announcement came sometime in January. And this is a prize that is basically given to a distinguished person, an original contributor, and Lebov has been one. And his contribution has been immense, because he is a serious, committed social linguist who is also very strongly sensitive to and committed to the cause of social justice and social equity. And his entire work on language and dialect, entire work on American vernacular English, is something that has really made us go back to realize that what he's talking about is, and today it has very strong relevance in what is happening around in the world, particularly in the American side. So this is the topic that I intend to take. Now, I know that the style has been a pivotal construct in the study of social linguistic variation, and much more attention has been paid looking into the relation of variation to social categories and speakers' place in the social world. As a result, exploration of speakers' strategies with regard to the social world remains incomplete. However, studies dealing with social theories of variation are reaffirming their faith in the centrality of style. For them, style assumes importance because it places variation within the wider range of linguistic practices with which speakers make social meaning. Now, this is the premise of talking about style, because the style was part of what Lebov was talking about, and style is still part of it. However, there was a kind of a not so much of a strength given to the working of the style, which has now been taken up by scholars subsequently after what Lebov has done. So when we're talking about style is a choice. The foundation of all social linguistics is that speakers have choices when they talk. And this is what Alan Bell talks about. Style rests on the premise of choices. Considering that speakers have choices, the basis of a style is what speakers do with language choices. The language choices that speakers make can be at the macro level or at the micro level. Macro level choices can be between languages. And we all know that the style, the kind of a style being taken by Lebov had been as an intra micro level, because he was talking about the style within, taking the categories, taking the social variable as ing, or taking r, presence or absence of r, as a social variable. But there's also a possibility of looking at it as a macro level. The reason why it is possible to look at macro level, because, like, I take the example of Hindi Urdu, because these are the two examples. I switch over from Hindi to Urdu with equal felicity. There's no problem with me. And along with my switch over from one to another, there is an accompanying style that is there. So it's a style which is there between the languages. Or you have a regional variety, and that between the other varieties of North Indian languages. The micro level, of course, is very, very clear, whether it is Hindi Urdu or it is English, whether it is English in case of the presence or absence of ter consonants, in the middle of an English word, for example, butter for a Cockney in London, or you have the alterations that is there, the choice that you have between k and k. So something being called as a kalam and something being called as a qalam for a pen. Or you have a choice between z and j. So zarur aayenge, zarur and jarur, or something that is there between a sh and sa. So most of the shibboleths that you have with regard to the language. So these are the things which are part of the choices at the micro level. Usually, language choices refer to the choice between different languages, that is macro, rather than macro choices within languages, that is micro. Hence, linguistic style is a monolingual counterpart of bilingual's choice between languages. And I'll take up this issue of the monolingual counterpart towards the end of my paper presentation, because here there is something that I will connect you to one of the strong criticisms that has been raised against Lebov, basically emanating from his book, very famous book on the principles of language change that he had brought out in 3 volumes. The first with regard to the general language, second was with regard to the social part, and the third one with regard to the cognitive part, and how much the social has been reduced there. So I'll take up that later on. So style is the distinctiveness. It works on 2 sets of binarity. That is, one binarity is the sameness, this, and the other binarity is the distinctiveness, that. So you have a this versus that distinctiveness. The trajectory of exploration of binarity takes us beyond description to explanation. Beyond description to explanation, because it is not the question of what it is, but there's the question of why it is. And this trajectory is significant because many times social linguistics is critiqued for being only descriptive. That is, it is said to be good at telling us what it is, what is happening, rather than being able to provide any explanation that is not good or telling us why it is happening like this. Now, this has been critiqued for the social linguistics because it is largely being said that social linguistics lacks theory. Of course, we have an answer coming from none other than Fairclough when he talks about the explanatory part in the study of language vis-a-vis society, and that is basically a kind of a responsive approach that was there taken by Clough and even otherwise by other scholars. So we are coming into the 2 approaches that are there with regard to style. The macro level, which is a minimalist approach, and this minimalist approach is basically an approach which is concerned with what is happening for the language at a structure level. It is a minimalist approach. It is basically represented by Lebov's variationist methodology. The entire variationist paradigm is revolving around the macro level minimalist approach. And here the macro level features called as variables being considered. And these variables with alternating variants occur in highly specified linguistic environments. Now, this is the micro level minimalist approach. You have a macro level maximalist approach, which includes full range of linguistic levels, from micro variables of pronunciation to broad discourse or genre patterns in which the individuals express themselves differently. So you have moved from micro to macro level. So when we are talking about micro to macro level, then now we are coming to explaining basically now what has been Lebovian paradigm. What has Lebov got to talk about? So my concentration now is on Lebov. So when we are going to talk about micro, I'll be concerned more with the Lebov and his entire theorization, which is there at the micro level. So Lebov's theorization of style. Now, in the quantitative paradigm of social linguistics, style was assigned theoretical and methodological importance. And the first time that it was brought to our notice was in his famous New York City's study in 1966, in which he paid attention to speech. That was a very crucial point at that point of time, because the entire attention was on speech. And where he demonstrated that the use of socio-linguistic variables is socio-economically stratified. And I'm sure you people are familiar with the kind of a work that he did in the 1966 study of the New York City, the famous departmental store study. So this was basically to tell us that the use of social-linguistic variables, they are socioeconomically stratified. That is, the stylistic range of each speaker covers a continuous subset of use within a socio-economic matrix. In the socio-economic hierarchy, global prestige was placed at the upper end, while the local stigma was placed at the lower end. And each end of the continuum characterized the range of style of a speaker. So he talked about a continuum where the upper end of the continuum carried the prestige, and the lower end was basically a stigma. And from there, he brought into the notion of prestige from above. So from above or from below. These are the two the notions that were brought in by Lebov. The stylistic range of a speaker placed at the prestigious end was considered most formal and careful speech, while the one placed at the stigmatized end was most casual and unmonitored speech. Lebov's 1996 study thus clearly showed direct connection between speakers' stylistic activity and the socio-economic hierarchy. That is, the speaker's place in and strategies with respect to the socio-economic hierarchy. Now, along with this study, there appeared a triadic connection, and that came with the idea of hypercorrection that Lebov introduced. In fact, hypercorrection has been a very interesting concept that Lebov gave in this study. And what was this triadic connection that Lebov talked about? This triadic connection was basically a connection between linguistic, cognitive, and social. So the three things, the linguistic, the cognitive, and the social, were brought in. Now, Lebov's discussion related to hypercorrection, and that was in 1972. It was based on his 1966 work, of course, and it assumes significance because it established a crucial connection between the individual and the community, between the linguistic, the cognitive, and the social. The triadic connection between linguistic, cognitive, and social was possible to establish because of the attention paid to speech in the Lebovian variationist paradigm. Because attention, as you all know, is the cognitive mechanism that links social to linguistic factors. This makes the notion of vernacular become important. So now, because of the attention, the notion of attention that was there, that brought in the idea of vernacular, which is a very important idea from the Lebovian point of view, not only because it is telling you about this, it is bringing in the notion of what is important, but it is also telling you that the entire study of change and progress can be looked at from this perspective only. So what has been the Lebovian notion of vernacular? We need to understand that. Vernacular is the speech that is most natural. It exists with no intervening or any prior correction, and it emerges with no monitoring of speech by the speaker. Lebov believes that the most natural speech lies in the vernacular, and it is the vernacular that provides best evidence of the processes of change. For getting the most natural speech, manipulation of informant's style is necessary. Hence, the focus was on the field methods and the designing of the sociolinguistic interviews to elicit as wide a range of a speaker's style as possible, from the most careful to the most casual speech. And herein, his famous observer's paradox emerged. It emerged as a strategy, as a methodological ploy, and it was considered fundamental to the sociolinguistic interview that Lebov carried out in his study. Lebov had understood that if one were to get the vernacular, that is the most casual speech, the formal context in which the speakers interact with interviewers who are strangers is unlikely to be the vernacular. So, in order to elicit a broader range of styles of interviewees, manipulation of the topic is important. And there were a series of such manipulations going on when he was trying to elicit data from his informants. This is premised on the assumption that some topics will focus interviewees on their speech, while others will bring distraction, and the focus will shift away from the speech. So the moment the distraction takes place, you slip into the unself-conscious state of yours. And that is where you get at the most natural speech. That is the most casual, the speech that Lebov is looking for as part of his vernacular. Now, this is what happened with regard to the Lebovian theorization of style. Now, what happens is that when Lebov said that, okay, you have a topic, which is important, because at times topic also allow you to go for manipulation. And then it also said that there is also possible to shift away from topic. And this shifting away from topic is something that distracts you. So now we are moving from the topic to the audience. Now this is an interesting movement, an interesting journey. Although topic is the parameter that Lebov consciously controls in the interview, and he does it very well, his insistence on vernacular and use of the observer's paradox as a strategy for eliciting the most natural speech can be seen as a point of departure from topic to audience. In fact, the observer's paradox stems from the belief that audience is the fundamental influence on stylistic production. And this journey towards audience takes us close to what, now that we are moving out from Lebov, to people who belong to the macro level, that is a maximalist approach. So now we are moving towards the maximalist approach to study of variation. So when we are talking about maximalist approach, Alan Bell's study in 1984, it placed audience at the center of stylistic production. He argued that stylistic variation can be explained as a response to not only to the actual addressee, but also third persons, which he refers to as the auditors and overhearers. He also argued in the same study, he also argued that influence of topic shift is actually due to association of topics with audience types. So here, Bell is of course taking away things from Lebov, but at the same time, you still have the traces of Lebov which are still being followed by Bell. So there are the traces are still very much there of what Lebov has talked about. So Bell says that this association of topics and audience ties both are there. So he also introduced the effect of referees on style shifts. And the referees are absent referees. They are absent reference groups whose presence in the mind of the speaker would influence variability. So there is a kind of a metaphysical presence of the audience. They're not there, but it's there. He proposed an integrated view of style shifting, which is predicated upon the relation between social and stylistic variation. Now, this is an important thing from what Bell is talking about. So Bell has talked about this audience and referees. Both the things have been mentioned there. So now, from the Bell, we move on to others who have been a follower of the maximalist approach. Those others are people like Copeland, people like Rickford, and people like scholars like Judith Irwin. So I'll move to those scholars now. So when we are talking about now we are moving to Judith Irwin. The macro level of maximalist approach, it allows scholars like Irwin, her famous work of 2001, to view style as distinctiveness. By taking up the anthropological approach to stylistic variation, she draws parallels between style of speech and lifestyle, and insists on the necessity to analyze style within systems, taking ideologies and aesthetics into account. In her investigation of the defining distinctions between style, register, and dialect, she makes use of data from Javanese speech styles, Wolof speech varieties, and German dialects in southern Hungary to show how register, originally defined in terms of situations, and dialect, originally defined in terms of persons or groups. That is, you have the distinction that is there between the users and the use. So between the style and the register, which is defined in terms of situations and in terms of users, she goes on to look at, she says that these two terms cannot be clearly demarcated from each other. So she was not very happy with the terms of register and dialects for looking at the distinctiveness. For her, she drew insights from Bourdieu's work on distinction. And she takes style to involve more subtle degrees of distinctiveness. Example, within one speaker, while at the same time extending beyond linguistic phenomena. Her still ongoing research that she has had carried out with Irwin, with Susan Gall, which was published, part of it, in 2000. She then introduced the three semiotic processes of iconization, recursivity, and erasure. And for each of these, she provided examples from her own data to conclude that investigations of style should treat this as a creative process. In such investigations, she has found it important to place less emphasis on the specific features of a style and more on the contrasts and relationships between styles. Irwin's 2000 study stands out as it has placed emphasis on style as difference. This has been there with her study. So from Irwin, we move on to Copeland. And Copeland's study is an important study for us. So when we are talking about Copeland, let us look at Copeland's study. So this Copeland's language situation and the relational theorization and the relational theorizing dialect style in social linguistics. This was the article that Copeland talked about. In this article, Copeland's main tenet is that, and I quote Copeland here, that style needs to be related, it needs to be located within a model of human communicative purposes, practices, and achievements, and as one aspect of the manipulation of semiotic resources in the social context. Quote closed. He thus aims at avoiding both extremes of either overgeneralizing style as everything or narrowing it down to a single quantifiable sociolinguistic parameter. After presenting a list of 10 traditional sociolinguistic assumptions which he explicitly challenges, Copeland turns to those aspects which previous sociolinguistic approaches purportedly ignored, like communicative goals, functional complexity, issues of identity and selfhood, or attitudinal style, and Delheimsian notion of ways of speaking. In fact, the entire acronym of speaking, that is something where speakers make choices. So what he did, he brought in those things which he equates with patterns of ideational selection in a Hallidean sense. This is the idea of ideational that he borrowed from Halliday out of his three meta functions. In his theorizing, among other aspects, Copeland refutes the illusion of unmotivated style shifting and critiques calculation across different dimensions, especially the lack differentiation and situational and social categories, which consequently obscure local stylistic variation. He also makes extensive reference to Bakhtin. For example, his notion of conflict orientation of his styles. Copeland especially advocates a focus on people who use language rather than on texts as language itself. So the entire thrust has been on people who use language. For him, stylistic variation is person variation. So now we have moved to the individual, we have moved to the person. So this is where his emphasis has been. After propounding further his multidimensional view, which includes borrowing from literary criticism and defining the relational self as continually recreated autobiography, Copeland gives a brief illustration from a case study of a Cardiff disc jockey's speech, under the assumption that narrative of self-identity is inherently fragile, given the challenges of high modernity. Copeland concludes with the claim that any data is more complex than their analysis makes us believe. Now, this is where Copeland is talking about. Copeland, in fact, brought in the identity dimensions of his style. He treats stylistic variation as a dynamic presentation of the self. Hence, the focus has been on the strategic use of variables in discourse, rather than on the cumulative use of variables by speakers or groups of speakers. His emphasis on speakers' identity led him to take seriously the participants' perception of his style. And he argues that the tendency to focus on individual variables abstracts away from what speakers themselves perceive as a style. So Copeland was a major departure from the studies of style that preceded, and it is becoming an increasingly important study in the stylistics work. From there, we move to the Rickford's work, and also to McNaugh's, Knox, Rickford's work. They both followed Copeland, which raised the issue of performativity in style. Performativity suggests that variability can play a role in the performance of a speaker's own affiliation and identity. Emerging focus on agency is bringing researchers to examine variations as part of a process of construction of identities and social meanings, and to view variation in terms of relations of linguistic production. So now you could see that we are moving towards the performativity part. And what is performativity part? We'll take it up very soon. But this is now we are moving towards. So now again, we come to yet another aspect of the macro level maximalist approach to the style, which looks into the symbolic significance of a style to see a contrast between style plays, and which is done by Rampton in 2006. He looks at language as a semiotic resource, among others, such as music, dress, picture, by which persons and groups set themselves apart. And this is where one leads to yet another significant study that goes beyond Lebov, and the study is by Penelope Eckert. The 2000 study by Eckert, which looks at how cluster of practices compose an ideologically charged style, which she captures in her paper, Vowel and Nail Polish. These are the wider resources that macro-level maximalist offers, which go beyond the dimensions of style making. This is an interesting journey that has taken place. Now, the journey that took place, it took place because there has been a critique of Lebov, and the critique of Lebov was something which was very important, which was taken up by most of these scholars, because Lebov's techniques that were there for eliciting styles, although it has been highly productive and is being used extensively even today by different scholars in different language situations, and by and large, often arriving at similar patterns. In fact, his focus has been on eliciting casual speech by reducing the observer's paradox. And this technique has been used even today for people so that while collecting the data, they are not being observed. However, these techniques, which as we have mentioned earlier, these are more a methodological ploys for stimulating a range of speech rather than themselves representing styles. And this is very crucial for us to understand that they are more ploys for stimulating a range of speech rather than themselves representing styles. Although his techniques elicited styles within a recorded interviews, the relationship of range of speech beyond interview remains questionable. This is because people do not normally speak in minimal pairs. We talked about Bell, whose challenge who challenged Lebov's attribution of graded levels of attention paid to speech as the operative factor. According to Bell, attention can be directed at producing all levels of alternatives, not just more prestigious. If you recall Lebov's study of 1966, when he has taken the variable of different variables that he has taken at that time, I'll take up just one, which is ing form, because that has been consistent with Lebov, and that consistency can be seen even in his the one of the last studies by Lebov, which deals with the principles of linguistic change, the volume 2, which came out in 2001, and which is basically depicting the social factor. So what happens is that Lebov attributed the graded levels of attention, while Bell believed that attention can be directed at producing at all levels of linguistic alternatives, not just the most prestigious, which Lebov did, because in the continuum, the upper end of the continuum was the prestigious and the lower end was the stigmatized. Now let us take the case of ing. I'm taking it simply because that has been more consistent. We know that the alternation between ing and in the suffix of walking is one of the most widely salient sociolinguistic variables of English that Lebov considered in his 1966 study. However, we know that dropping the g, the English letter G, it marks social or formality levels in all Englishes. Although there is no phonetic G involved. Now the choice is between a standard velar pronunciation anga for the nasal versus a non-standard alveolar apical pronunciation no. In fact, variable ing is also stable, as I mentioned to you. Is also very stable, and it has been said to be an evidence for Lebov, which he says that it is everywhere whenever we are looking at the significant change in its frequency or usage. But while the Lebov's and even Turgill's work on social prestige was a key concept in ing and in form, the Kiesling's study, what replaced the prestige was the power, the notion of power. That became central in fraternity meetings, and fraternity members positioned themselves with both ing and in. Bell's audience design, actually, it was part of his rejection of mechanistic attribution of his style to attention, which Lebov paid. Because Bell believed that style centered on persons, not mechanisms. Now, from this, we move to the aspect which is which I had mentioned earlier, and now I will take it up. The aspect which is basically concerned with the notion of social, and here I will bring that notion of social to talk about the aspect. Can I have some water, please? So, so now I'll take up the social part, and before I talk about the social, I'll also like to connect myself to what Eckert has talked about, and that is important because that is also bringing us to the performativity part, which is important in the study of style. So when Eckert was talking about the style, the most important thing that Eckert brought in her paper, which was basically vowels and nail polish that I mentioned earlier, where she was looking at the emergence of linguistic style in the pre-adolescent heterosexual marketplace, where Eckert focuses on the emergence of local style among the female participants in the crowd of that is a marketplace, where a style that they see as teen style, but that others, depending upon their point of view, might see as reflecting gender, ethnicity, class, attitude. Now, linguistic style that Eckert was looking at, through an account of some day-to-day events, she describes the nature of stylistic development, the interconnection of language with style in action and appearance, and its role in the construction of gender, class, age, ethnicity, and number of interrelated terms of identity. Now, these events take place at the Northern California school where she has worked on, and she brought in the notion of performing style, that is the notion of stylization. The linguistic style is a way of speaking that is particular to a community of practice. This notion of community of practice that she brings from the Wenger's notion of community of practice, which she talks about in the context of language and gender. Style is a clustering of linguistic resources that has social meaning. The construction of a style is a process of bricolage. A stylistic agent appropriates resources from a broad sociolinguistic landscape, recombining them to make a distinctive style. In this way, the new style has a clear individual identification, but an identification that owes its existence to its life in a broader landscape of meaning. Above all, that style is not simply a product of community practices. It is not just a way of displaying identification. It is a vehicle for the construction of this identification. It is precisely the process of bricolage that allows us to put together meanings to construct new things that are us and that place us in relation to them, that is the rest of the world. This process of bricolage takes place within communities of practice, and to a greater extent is the joint work of the community and the tensions between individual and community identities. She relates the following series of vignettes in order to illustrate the emergence of a complex complex style as the age cohorts moves into the heterosexual and the practice. The emergence of a style is accomplished in a complex interplay between group and individual identity and style, and there where she focuses on between a stylistic icon and the home girls, the community of practice that is most prominent in her school-based activities. So this is now we have moved out from what style was looked at, coming to the performativity part. And we have just talked about the performativity, which is basically a kind of a stylization that goes on. I will take up the last part of my presentation, which is now basically the part where I look into what the before Philadelphia study has been by Lebov, and what has been the after Philadelphia study, which is again by Lebov. And these two studies are important for me because these two studies are the studies which have taken into the notion of language evaluation and the styles were central issues on the linguistic agenda before Philadelphia study. That is the before Philadelphia study, what was very important for Lebov was the language evaluation. So you have seen that we had all kinds of match guys techniques. We have seen how the styles being evaluated. So these techniques have been used by Lebov before Philadelphia study, and we have mentioned about these things in the New York City. So I moved from the before Philadelphia, I moved to the last part, which is the after Philadelphia study, which is one of the recent studies which he published in his book I've already mentioned, Principles of Linguistic Change, 2001 publication. This study after Philadelphia is marked by two things. It sets aside the style of evaluation and attitudes as forces in the change. So now the question is, who is responsible for the change? So this after Philadelphia study, Lebov sets aside the role of evaluation and attitudes as forces in the change, and it also reduces the role of social in language variation and change. This reducing the role of social in language variation and change holds significance for us, particularly for social linguistics. It holds significance because what Lebov adopted all throughout was a mechanical principle of density. Now, this is a Bloomfieldian notion, the principle of density. Bloomfield talked about this principle of density way back in his language, and Lebov adopted that. This mechanical principle of density, which he says that people influence each other. Their people influence each other's language merely through encountering and talking to each other. What matters is not their social, psychological motivations and responses, but simple fact that they interacted. This is very significant because now it is the interaction which has been talked about. The encountering and talking to each other is being talked about. We are also familiar with the kind of a curious ambivalence that one also gets in Lebov's work. The ambivalence I should not say ambivalence, ambiguity that one gets in the Lebov's work. The ambiguity that Lebov shows vis-a-vis the question of social in social linguistics. See, on the one hand, one finds resistance to the label social linguistics. And you're all familiar with his the first book that was brought out by him, called Sociolinguistic Patterns, with the name Sociolinguistic. Should not say first book, but the book with the sociolinguistic name, this Sociolinguistic Patterns. And in the introduction, in that book, 1972 publication, it says that it is very uncomfortable with the use of the term social in the introduction that he talks about. He's resisted the label social linguistics in that introduction. And then in the 1963 publication, which was The Social Motivation of Sound Change, a very famous article that was published in Word 19 issue, that reflects his mythologizing exercise when he proposed rechristening of the term social linguistics. The rechristening where he says that one should call it as a secular linguistics, not a social linguistics. And this rechristening, this suggesting of a new name, was basically as a part of his conscious desire to challenge sacred linguistic dogmas. And we have a very interesting study by a paper by Deborah Cameron, Demythologizing Social Linguistics, which takes up as a critique of Lebovian work. So this is where Lebov is moving out, and there is a reduction of a social in his work from what he was talking about earlier. I will just sum it up by saying that when we are moving to the notion of the performance, that is the performativity, that is the stylization. Now, this notion of stylization, which is being taken up by recent scholars, this notion of stylization is now giving bringing the idea of doing style. What you have in the case of what Judith Butler talks about, doing gender. So now people are talking about doing style. There's a stylization. Of course, the inspiration is Bakhtin, who talks about stylization. So that has been the source of inspiration. And now the performativity, the stylization, the doing part is being taken up. And perhaps it's owing to this doing part that we have also seen that the social category that you had, where you talked about the age, you talked about the class, you talked about the ethnicity, and initially you talked about the sex. From the sex, the term gender came. And that term gender came not because of any kind of a political correctness that we could think of, but it came because people, the studies carried out post-Lebovian, that those studies impacted people to believe that gender is something that is an ongoing process. You do gender every time. Since you do gender every time, it's better to capture this notion of doing through the gender. It cannot be captured through the sex. And that is the reason why the stylization notion came into account, because you're doing style every time. And this is the stylization that's going on. And in this context, I'll take you to the study by Rampton. Very interesting study, because Rampton talks about this style in the context of the post-national in the post-national context. And Rampton looks at the use of languages by the children in the schools in America. And there was a very interesting concept that he floated. Is called a deceptive fluency. Deceptive fluency. And what is a deceptive fluency? The deceptive fluency is something that when Rampton is looking at the speech of the Black vernaculars and the speech of others, he found out that there are many a time there is a kind of so much of a merging of his speech that you cannot identify who is speaking, who is the person who is speaking this which represents white and this which represents other than white. So there is a kind of a deception, and this kind of a deception which Rampton is talking about, this deception finally leads me to take up the quotation of Jacques Derrida, which I started in the beginning, not quotation, but idea, this deceptive fluency, that is for those who believe in this notion of this deceptive fluency is something that even though they may sound one, they are born not like that. So the South Asians cannot be the native speakers of English in that context. And here, there's a very interesting conclusion that I can make from Jacques Derrida's work, where he says that this is an exemplary moment for a performative contradiction, an antinomy, if you like, where he would have declared, yes, I only have one language, and yet it is not mine. So there is a challenge to the ownership of the language. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I'm sure all of our students have benefited a lot from your talk. So as you know that we had this streaming in our YouTube channel as well, and we have a few questions on the YouTube channel, but I would like to request if anybody here has a question for sir as far as his talk today is concerned, or I'm sure sir will be welcome to sir will be all right about asking other questions, answering other questions, other queries that you might have as well. If anyone has a question, you may just switch on your camera or switch on your microphone and ask your question to Imtiaz sir. Or if you would like, you could also write your question in the chat box. I'm monitoring the chat box currently. If you have a question, you can go ahead. So we'll wait for the questions to come in the chat box, or if anybody wants to, they can just open their microphone and all. The question that we have in the YouTube stream section, it is, one second. Someone has asked that you have spoken about Lebov's criteria, which Lebov employs to relate linguistic variables to different social classes. Could you also speak a little bit about Trudgill's approach and Milroy's approach? If there is any difference between them, and if yes, then
okay,
a little bit about that.
Trudgill's approach is basically an extension of Lebov. It's an extension of Lebov, except that he has added two more. The two more parameters there. Lebov had only three. He talked about casual, careful, and word list. Trudgill made it 5. So there's the only difference, but the entire methodology is what Lebov had. Milroy is very different. Milroy's work is basically a work which talks about the network. So this is something that I did not want to take up, because my thesis, my concentration was on style. So I was not going to approaching the speakers. So this is the reason why I did not take up Milroy. I could have taken Trudgill, but I thought that Trudgill has been more of a derivative. So in that case, it's better to take Lebov, because he took up Lebov's work and extended it further. His Norwich study is an extension of Lebov's work. I hope I have given the answer to you.
I'm sure. So there was the user probably, if the person is still watching the stream, he or she will be satisfied. So you have a few congratulatory messages in the chat as well about how great an explanation this has been. And someone from Indonesia has also joined us today, and they thank you for your explanation and sharing your knowledge. Thank you very much, Ms. Sri Devi from Indonesia. Thank you very much. If anybody has a question, you can go ahead and ask. If not, we can move on to the next section, which is Professor Srikumar sir will be joining us, and he will be giving you the formal vote of thanks, and we'll move on from there. Srikumar sir?
Yeah, sir. Are there any other questions from the audience or from anybody else?
So there are none in the chat box. There was one which I have already asked, sir. I think we can go ahead because we are perfectly on time as well.
Sir, I had a question.
Yes, sure.
You talked about recursivity with regard to some proposal.
Mhm.
Now, what kind of recursivity is it? Is it something like pattern, duplication, like as we have it in syntax? See, recursivity is a very common notion in syntax. So, is it an extension of the same kind of thing for style?
Okay, no, Sri Kumar, it's got nothing to do with the theoretical part that you're talking about.
Uh-huh.
This recursivity is basically with regard to the language practices.
Uh,
So the kind of a practices that you have. Let me give you an example. So what happens, like you have an iconization. The three terms have been given. They are the terms which have been used by Susan Gall.
mhm,
These are terms called iconization,
mhm.
recursivity, and erasure.
Erasure. Okay.
Erasure.
Mhm.
So iconization is where you there is an icon,
Yeah.
and that icon is further strengthened day in day out to become a kind of an acceptable thing for you to understand. So icon, you know what is icon.
Yeah.
So something which is there, and there is an iconization process going on. But what is the recursivity? Recursivity is through certain discourse. You keep on reproducing the same practices. So
Mm,
it is not in the theoretical linguistics syntactics term of recurring pattern, but it's the practices that are there. And erasure is that something that is removed from the memory. So what is being removed from the memory and what is brought in? So these are the three things that are there. I can explain to you with regard to what the study that I did with in case of Urdu. I can, in fact, I can send that paper to you. That the three things I have approached, I've taken up as a model for my study of the Urdu and Hindi, and I looked at this iconization, the recursivity, and the erasure. The iconization in terms of a script that is there, the recursion, the recursivity which is there in the form of the discursive practices that are being used, and the erasure is how exactly it is the practices are the previous ones are being gradually evaded, they're gradually erased from the memory through certain other modes of production. So this is what I'm talking about as three things. These are the things that have been taken by Susan Gall. Okay.
sir, thank you.
So there is another question in the chat box.
Yeah.
Gopabandhu Mohanty ji says, please talk about the consequences of the Belfast study.
Mohanty, I think I will not be able to talk about the consequences because that will take me to another debate altogether. My concentration has been more on style, so I will stick to that because again, Belfast is not the study by Lebov. So I will.
Lebov, yeah.
So I'm sticking to that. Okay.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Sri Kumar, sir, I think we can go ahead.
Okay. Sir, yeah. On behalf of the Department of Linguistics, I would, thank Professor Imtiaz Hasnain for giving us, for having, given us this illuminating talk. It was very informative. Professor Imtiaz Hassan actually takes, the notion of style from Labovian, paradigm to a different kind of dimension where he brings in the notions like what is it, macro level and so on, which I think is an extension of all those ideas, as a result of sociology of linguistics or whatever you can talk about. That is the style at the micro level and style at the macro level. This is an entirely different dimension that you are providing for the notion of stylistic variation. Labau talked about stylistic variation as a locus of, linguistic variation. That locus of variation has been extended over to macro levels involving linguistic variation at macro levels. That I'm sure you will be bringing in notions like diglossia and other things over here. So it was an interesting talk. I'm sure all of us have benefited from it, and it will keep us, thinking about all these notions from a different angle. So on behalf of the department, I would thank you extremely for having given this, illuminating talk. Then I would also take this opportunity to thank our Vice Chancellor for having permitted us to organize this web talk series. We are also grateful to CEL for graciously supporting this event. We are extremely thankful to all the audiences who have joined us today. I hope you all will join us even for the rest of the series. Right on tomorrow, we have another lecture by Ritesh Kumar. That's it. Thank you all. So it is over to, yeah. So I think, Madhuri, yeah.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. I would just like to request everyone, if you could switch on your cameras for just 1 second, we can have a photograph with Imtiaz sir, and then we can have that for our Facebook posts and everything. Thank you very much. Just for 1 second, if you switch on your cameras. Thank you. I'm taking the picture. Thank you, everybody who has switched on their cameras. Of course, it was a choice. Thank you, Imtiaz sir, and we have taken the picture.
Thank you very much, Madhuri.
Thank you so much for coming, sir, and thank you, Srikumar sir, and thank you, everybody, all of you who have come here. Yes, sir, were you saying something?
No, I just wanted to say thanks to Kavita ji and Srikumar.
Thank you, sir.
And thank you to Madhuri for conducting.
Thank you, sir. This is available online, the entire talk, for any one of you who wants to go back and revisit some of the concepts that sir has talked about. This will be available on the University of Lucknow's Department of Linguistics YouTube channel. You can just go and click LU Linguistics and you will find our channel there, and it will be available. Once the stream has stopped, you'll be able to watch that. Thank you very much, sir.